Welcome back to Lit versus Genre, everybody. And Jeff, it has finally come. It is fine after all
Yes.
this waiting, all this anticipation, a year
Yeah.
of us reading book one together in painful detail. We are now totally here for the first three episodes. And how you feeling?
I don't know. I'm
Am I putting you on the
wait.
spot? Am I putting you on the spot
No,
right
no, it's fine. It's fine. I don't need it's tough to know where to begin. I've even made some, notes, and even then I'm still just like shell shocked, basically. I'm gutted as a human. I'm hollow inside now and trying to stuff it back full of feelings. Um,
now?
yeah, where to begin?
Let's start here, man. Let's start
Yeah, let's
with
give
positives.
I've
You
got
gotta
some
have
things.
some
I've got some.
positive. There have to be some positives to this, right? So let's start
I
with
think that.
positives, and
You
we'll go
you
from
think
there.
there would be somewhere in there. Let me just start. I think let me just put out a little kind of caveat for people watching. So let me just say, I am going to talk about some positives, and I also want people to know that I'm not. I don't think Steve is either. Looking to steal anyone's enjoyment, right? Like if you watch this show and if you loved it, you enjoyed it, that's great. That's wonderful.
I'm
And
looking
you
to steal
probably
your
can
enjoyment,
stop
Jeff.
now, not
Whatever
even listen to
small
this.
amount you have, I'm looking to snatch it away.
Yeah, right. Steve, on the other hand, wants to take it from me. Um, However, I do think it's important for us to talk about things that work or not work in the larger conversation about storytelling to ideally lead to even better storytelling in the future. And so I have thoughts about this. But in terms of good stuff, yes. There were some moments where I felt like I was actually watching the Wheel of Time. We were texting a little bit, and we joked that one of the main moments I feel like I was actually watching a show about the Wheel of Time was the story time about Manetheren after the song, and then Moraine talking about like the history. And so that was nice. That really felt like book to screen, even though that's not the exact way that happens. It felt sort of natural that they're on the road, the kids decide to sing a song, and then Moraine actually knows more about the history of that song. Cool. That was neat. There was also some really good visuals. I thought the Trollocs overall looked really cool. I especially enjoyed them, running on all fours. Shadow Logoth looked pretty cool. So yeah, no, I mean, I did make sure to make a list of some positives. So those are some initial, positive thoughts since you asked me to start there. Uh, Overall, though, I feel like this was made for people who like fantasy, but maybe aren't actually fans of the books. This didn't really feel like a show for people who wanted to see the books be on screen. Don't get me wrong. I think people that, you know, I'm not saying you can't enjoy the books and enjoy this show, but there was just so many changes to the books. I think this show is literally more things that weren't in the books than were in the
That
books,
is
and that is just
that is
shocking.
so funny, man, because I was actually surprised at how I'm not gonna say closely, definitely in a massively condensed way, but I actually thought they were gonna stray way further from the storyline of
Really?
book one. Like I thought, like it is way more journey, and hitting kind of a lot of those beats than I thought. I thought I'm on record saying I thought they were gonna go way more far afield. In these opening episodes, bringing in way more of the world. Like we got a little bit of a White Cloak kind of side story. We got like a
Yeah.
real touch of Red Ajah in the beginning, but kind of still sort of tied to Land and Moraine in that opening scene. And like beyond that, we were with this core group of characters on their journey through these first three episodes. And so I was actually surprised. I was like, oh wow, they are just doing it. They're just doing that.
That's equally shocking for me to hear you say. Before I think we dig into the deeper ones, you have to bear with us, everyone. This is our first time kind of reviewing the full thing, and there's just so much to say with 3 episodes. I do think it might be useful for us to maybe just say at the front our quick review of the show, like if we liked it or not, if we'd recommend it or not, and then kind of get into the weeds. I mean, I don't think anyone's watching this who hasn't already seen it. There were already a fair number of non-spoiler reviews out there, but I'm just curious before we get into the whys, like Steve, did you like this? Like, would you recommend this show for somebody to watch? Like, if you knew someone was a fantasy fan, would you be like, oh, like you should totally
Oh,
go see
that's
that
an
show?
interesting question. If someone is a fantasy fan, I would say, yeah. I almost feel like out of pure curiosity, if you're a fantasy fan, you're gonna watch the show, right? Like no doubt. I think
Yeah,
the
I
more
feel, I feel like that's good. I
interesting
feel like
question for
every
me would
person
be
who
like,
likes
would I
fantasy
just
will watch it. So would you recommend it to a non-fantasy fan?
right? I don't think so. I wasn't super grabbed by it, but I mean I think part of that reason was I wasn't super grabbed by book one. And you say you're the girl surprised that I found it hewed more
Yeah.
closely to book one than I thought it was going to. I mean, like what part of it do you think is not hewing or that is like massively deviating from like the kind of main story beats of book one?
So, yeah, I mean, in terms of the major beats, well, before I answer that, I would just like to. So you're basically saying, as a fantasy fan, sure, why not? If you're not a fantasy fan, I mean, I don't think there was. Well, now I'm getting into mine, but yeah, there wasn't a big pull. You think from like an emotional standpoint or some like crazy plot thing that a regular person would.
This is where the comments people are come after me. And again, remember, please dislike and subscribe. We're
Yeah,
trying to get as many of both as possible. But I am on record
exactly.
in multiple, like a whole year's worth of
Right.
videos, being like, I don't really like book one of
Oh no,
this
completely,
series.
completely. But
And
they couldn't save it for you. They couldn't, bring in like stellar actors or just incredible visuals or something else that would
I
pull you in
thought
anyway.
I thought the acting was good. Again, you'll have
Okay.
to tell me from an acting standpoint. I had no problem with any of the actors. I thought they were all believable. There was no like hiccups where I'm like, that's really awkward line reading or anything like that. I didn't have any problem with that. As far as emotional pull, I this is maybe what's going to be the most shocking to you of anything I say. Actually liked Rand in this. They made me give a shit about Rand, which I did not think I would ever in a million bazillion years give a shit about Rand. And they did it. And how did they do it? Well, they give him his problem right away, which is there's none of this do I like her, do I not like her? No, I love Egg. I definitely want to be with Egg. I want to have babies with Egg in the mountains, and that's all I want my life to be. And Egg straight up rejects him right at the beginning, and I was like, oh, that is baller. And I think that like super made up for, I know you were like kind of skeptical about her joining the women's circle or becoming the wisdom or something like that right at the beginning, but I was like, that was a good choice because now like when he's kind of angry Rand for the rest of the episodes, there is a reason why. And I like feel for this guy. And like imagine also I think it just heightens having to be on this journey with this love of your life, grows the love of your life, and she wants something else, but she also does love you. Like you get through it that there's this conflict in Egg that she's like, yeah, actually having lots of little Rand babies would be great. That would be a great life too, but I also have this desire, this other desire, and that's the Faulknerian definition of a story, the human heart in conflict with itself, that they did in this. And like, was I super compelled by it? Is it like something that's gonna pull me through the rest of the series? Meh. But they made me give a shit about Rand, and I was super surprised.
Okay. Okay. All right. But okay. So no, I from an intellectual standpoint, I hear what you're saying about that from like, the way stories work and can be compelling. But overall, I mean, we haven't decided on if we're doing star levels or whatever. Is it star versus
I
like
don't think,
rating
I
something?
mean, I don't know. Like, nobody can. We're two schmoes on the internet.
Yeah,
Nobody's
I'm not
gonna
saying
be
we need
like,
to.
oh, what did Steve and Jeff, what's their rating? I think it's kind of more interesting and would be more interesting to our viewers and something that we can offer as people who try and write this stuff ourselves, breaking down these story things and like what, we think is working, what we don't think is working. And I think that's more valuable than like, do I love
Oh,
it or do I
completely.
recommend it?
No, no, completely, completely. I guess I'm just thinking, so, you know, I thought there would be a fair number of things you would like about the story
Mm.
changes. So I guess I'm just interested to, hear you say that, yeah, fantasy fans go ahead because it's fantasy, why not? Non-fantasy fans, eh. And I think what you're more saying about Rand was like, that's more the exception. Like you were pleasantly surprised, that
Yeah.
they actually did something with that. But there wasn't just enough overall that like if we weren't doing this, like would you have watched past like episode 1 or episode 2? Would you like keep watching this show weekly?
I mean, probably not, but not for a reason people in the comments are gonna like, because it's not deviating enough from the book, and I didn't like the book. So I wanted more of the larger world, like parts that like really
Yeah.
what I try to do is like when I'm giving feedback at things, talk about things that I responded to, that I like just felt like a zap of electricity about. And though I didn't completely, I had questions about how it was working. I loved that the white cloak dude, which from the trailer I felt like I was like gonna love that dude as like a good villain, just as like a good performance and like a villain having fun being a villain in the show. And like the little cold open of episode 2 with him, like I don't know how I felt about the burning at the stake thing. Maybe that's something that does happen in Wheel of Time, but like obviously they're going for that witch metaphor, and and I was like wasn't sure about that because I'm like if she's like a nice to die, can't she just like I don't know magicy you right now in the
And,
face,
and
right? And that would be bad. But
apparently hands are
like
needed for
but I liked
using the
this
power.
scene and I liked being outside of like the insular
Right.
group and like seeing more of the world and like getting more just other
Right.
people that are fun and that I like want to be around. So like I would have gone much harder into that and maybe this is kind of what we were talking about in the GQ article that it's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't type situation where like maybe they felt like they could only sprinkle that sort of stuff in so lightly like in these first few episodes they had to really hew to the like okay these beats were going on this journey split them up at Shadar Logoth boom.
Maybe I don't know. I feel like the show had such little regard for the source material. I don't know that that could be their thinking, but I guess
I
maybe
wanted
in
them to
their
have
viewpoint.
less. I wanted them
No, I mean, I would have preferred that. It would have been less time for them to mess it up and
yeah.
change a million things. Yeah, no, I mean, I was with you from the get-go of the beauty of doing this adaptation of a 14 book series is now you know. Like, remember Jordan didn't know all this stuff when he was writing the first book. Now you've got this like even more fleshed out, rich history you can pull from and jump around to. So yeah, like getting to see a scene with the White Cloaks, getting to see the capture of, Logain, getting to see Aes Sedai politics, to pull out and see the world more. Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's I think why a lot of people love the series is because of the world and the world building, and you'd be doing that a favor. So yeah, no,
That
that would
also
have been a
mm,
perfectly fine
it makes me
change.
wonder if I might like the future episodes more because that's where we did make a hard left turn was right at the end of episode 3 where like Lan, Nynaeve, and Moraine just happen upon Logain being carted down the road, right? Like I was like, okay, here's the
Yeah.
first thing that's I mean, I understand what you mean about changes, but I mean about like hard story beats. That's the first one that feels like a hard left turn to me from what actually happened in book 1.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if we're, really going macro, like overall, like
Yeah.
stuff, like the major story beats. But that's also because the the latter two-thirds or whatever, the book doesn't have many of those. It's more just travel, 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 travel,
Right.
travel, 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 travel,
That
travel,
might be
travel.
why.
So yeah, so I mean, if you're inserting like, oh, and big thing, cool, right? And those sort of later ones to me are fine. But now we're starting to get into the beats. But I was going to talk about my thoughts on the show, which I still will. But I will say there is something nice about us being totally right. I feel like there were a lot of predictions we had that completely happened in terms of the beginning showing, of course, the Aes Sedai chasing, a man to show that, but it was less than I expected. It
Right.
was they sort of did just this blip of the world and what's happening, and so that was shorter than we thought it was going to be, but they did it. Moraine was there, as we predicted she would be, weirdly watching from like a
Yeah, that was
hilltop
weird. They just happened
and
to be there. I think they could have
just
just cut
happened to
that.
randomly be there.
Yeah, there's no
So
reason.
yeah, so I mean, I guess there is some joy in us being right. As I predicted, they completely skipped any sort of nuance about the town, and they just like went right in and had all the fighting and the craziness happen all in episode one. Um,
What else,
and
Jeff? What
then
else are
and
you
then yeah,
doing in episode one? If episode doesn't one doesn't end with that, what else are you doing in that episode? You're really just hanging out that whole episode.
right. But I'm just saying they didn't. Right, there was just no nuance of the time. I mean, I suppose the little bit with the women's circle, um, a little bit there,
There's
but yeah,
women's
none of
circle. There was
the
the kind of lantern-y lighting thing, which I don't even know if that was like a real
yeah. I mean,
thing.
they
It
yeah. So they
wasn't in
just
the book,
did
but it
whatever
was
they.
like kind of nice. I mean, I liked it as like this is the culture of the town. This is giving you like an idea of how the town works. Um,
Yeah, but I mean, it's like you're spending time on stuff that's just made up. Like again, they're just it's all replacement. Like none of it's actually what happens in the story.
but that's okay.
But
It doesn't
that's kind
have
of
to be
send me
stuff.
down a rabbit hole. Basically, I'm just saying that I think there's something nice about us being correct in our predictions thus far. Um, I know that you had predicted maybe a bigger open with Logain and like the full battle, right?
Yeah.
And that would have been more fun than I think what actually happened.
I like
Um,
that little like twist that the guy's not really there with him to like visually
yeah,
illustrate the madness, because I mean madness is a hard thing to kind of
I do like
visually
that.
illustrate in a visual medium, and I thought that was kind of I was happy with that before Moraine and Land showed up on a high cliff above. I was like,
Right?
oh, I kind of like this little as I the other thing that I think is weird was I didn't know that little clip that we watched was the beginning of the
Right.
episode with her just in voiceover, and like that was our Star Wars crawl at the beginning of it, and I found it awkward. I think I would have just opened with those Aes Sedai chasing that dude. I think that's how I would have started the show.
That I think would have been better, honestly.
Mm.
I mean, don't get me wrong, when we were watching the trailers, we talked about how getting that voiceover from Rain, but that was like there was one before that. There was another voiceover from Rain one that like showed like the landscape and everything.
Yeah.
And that was the first trailer we were like, oh wow, this trailer actually makes sense because it was her voicing over all the action, right? So as a trailer that worked.
Hmm.
But then when that newer one dropped that, we already did a video on, to have that be the first minute, yeah, it's just, yeah, I would have rather them just jump straight into the Aes Sedai chasing the guy. I do agree. I enjoyed the other person not being there, and the idea of the madness taking him. Hearing a Red Aja talk about, again, it's like I can't help but get into the weeds of it. Hearing a Red Aja talk about like you're making the power dirty. But it's just going to be a hate spiral if I continue. So basically, I just wanted to state that it was cool to see some of the things pan out the way we thought they would. So now even though we're now crazy far into the video, I'm going to go ahead and say my quick reaction of recommend or not. As you're saying, I do think any fantasy fan is going to check this out because why not, right? If you enjoy it, cool. If you hate it, the good news is there is some other good fantasy out there. I recommend you watch Arcane. That's more steampunk. I recommend Castlevania animated show. If you're looking for live action, I recommend Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which you can watch on Amazon. But this show is getting, it's only 3.5 stars on Amazon. I think for reasons. If I wasn't doing this show, I don't know if I could have watched past episode one. I was definitely hate watching 5 minutes in, 10 minutes in, maybe. It was a painful experience for me. I will say that it did improve. There were moments in episode 2 and episode 3 that I found myself enjoying and actually being like, oh, I think I'm actually watching a show about Wheel of Time. That's cool. I didn't know I was. So that was nice. But oh man, there's just so much we could potentially talk about. So I would say, I think if you're, casually watching a fantasy show, cool. I think if you didn't really like the original Wheel of Time, you might like this. If you are a diehard Wheel of Time fan, I think that's where a lot of these ratings are come from. And don't get me wrong, I think some Wheel of Time fans are able to just say, you know what this is, just a total utter retelling and just trying to appreciate it from that standpoint. And I really did try from later episodes. There's just a lot of tough choices that they make, and by tough choices I mean just tough to watch, especially after waiting for so long to get a show like this. It's just kind of hurtful and sad, but but let's
All right.
dig
Well,
into this thing.
I mean, this is gonna
Yeah.
be everybody. This is gonna be, I think, Jeff, group therapy session is what
Yeah.
this
It's
episode is gonna be. So let's just get in. Let's just pull the band-aid off.
yeah, let's
Tell me,
that now we're
like,
that let's
what
get into it.
in episode one has you so riled up? I'm so far, I don't like the narration from Moraine in the beginning. I don't even think we need it. I think like it kind of does the classic trap of that
Right.
information is all perfectly able to be given in scene. And like I didn't really get why there needed to be voiceover narration. Not that scene, obviously, because she's not doing anything but getting dressed, suiting up. But like I didn't like that. I didn't like that they're above the Red Aja, like looking down, like nobody kind of
It's
notices them up there. I didn't like
ridiculous.
that.
Like they
Uh,
just happen to be there. She just
yeah.
happens to know that he's not the Dragon Reborn. Um, Also, just the scene in the beginning about, you make the power dirty when you touch it. Like that's just not how it works. It's the
Okay.
Dark One
But do
thinks
you,
that
on a story level, do you? I know it's different. Do
right.
Why do you dislike it though, as like a new thing?
So here's what I would say, and this was my concern from the trailers. I see them making changes because they want to justify certain aspects of the story. But in my opinion, in most cases, don't get me wrong, I think they've got some good wins. In most cases, I don't think they're talented enough storytellers to pull it off.
Well, that's
And
ad
so
hominem
they
attack. Tell me why
no,
this
no,
particular. No,
I'm
I
going to,
mean,
I'm
but
going
this
to, I'm just
particular
saying
thing that the Red Aja are a little bit more like, oh,
I'm going to
men
say
taint
I
it.
I will.
Yeah,
I will. I'm
but
just
do it
saying like
without
there's
saying they're
just
not
one
talented.
instance. There's just one instance of many, and I'm just saying that this is going to be a theme throughout the show that they make a change, but then they don't really do enough with the change to make it worthwhile. So for this one, the change exists obviously as an easier reason for the Red Ajah to hate men. This idea that, men are making it dirty, right, for some reason. But if that's the case, then what is going to be the alternate history then of this world? If it's not the case that as Moraine actually describes earlier, when they tried to stop the Dark One, then the Dark One's backlash caused this, right? So if it's almost like we're getting conflicting stories. I mean, viewers who are new don't know that yet because they just hear about the arrogance of men trying to stop and it not working, and another Aes Sedai saying like you're making it dirty. But how are they going to end up reconciling the story if the Dark One isn't the one who tainted it, if just men taint it, if men make it dirty?
This just what she
You know,
says is
how
not
does
the
that
truth, Jeff.
work?
What she says is
What?
not the truth of the universe. It's like one group's kind of view or opinion of the universe, or even who knows, maybe this girl just like just got out of a bad relationship.
I
Like, I
understand
don't
that,
think you can say that's
we
bad
can have
because
narrators
it
that are
conflicts.
untrustworthy narrators, of course. A classic writing device to use untrustworthy narrators, absolutely.
Right.
But also, if you're introducing someone to the world, right? A lot of viewers are going to take that as the truth of the world initially. And again, like, what are you gaining from that change? So,
An
like, from that
antagonist.
change, people who like the story of Wheel of Time, the original, it's going to piss them off. Like, so what are you gaining by changing something?
An
Like, for
antagonist.
example, Nynaeve, right? Nynaeve, I would say the fact that they've got Moraine sick and thus Nynaeve has greater agency to actually be able to like heal and offer something and bargain with Lan,
Yeah.
that's a change to the narrative,
Hmm.
obviously, but it's a change that creates something, you know, interesting there. Like we get these sort of different streams, a different power dynamic happening between Lin and Eve. So you're getting a trade-off. You're saying, all right, fans, I'm doing something different, but I think you're really going to like this other thing that I'm doing for the story. Cool. I would just say that most of those choices they make don't end up having a payoff, or it actually makes things worse.
Okay. Well,
And in
let's
this
talk
particular
about the Red
case, it could be
Ajah
sort of,
one. Let's talk about
it could be
that
sort
one
of
because I like that one.
you like her saying that
Yeah.
you men make it dirty because then that makes her like a bigger bad guy or
Yeah.
something? I would like it if Moraine hadn't also just said it. If we had just done the cold open, as you say, and we're setting up the Red Ajah as against men, because they are, then I'd be cool with it more so. But because we've got Moraine bashing, like saying the arrogance of men, and then you've got her right after doing it, it paints it almost like all Sedai hate men or again think that maybe men are making it, dirty or something, which again changes the nature. Now I know you're for the idea of the Aes Sedai being like this big group against, right? But
Yeah, and Maureen
I-
doesn't say exactly the same thing as that. She says in like
no,
somebody can be arrogant but still be like good and have good intentions, like which clearly is how I read this. You're just biting off more than you can chew, or like thinking that you can do something that you really can't. Which may be fair because they don't really do it what they thought they could do.
I'm not saying
Um,
it's just it creates a different tone for the show right away.
All
And again,
right,
I don't
I could
see
argue with you.
much of an
I
upside
could
to
agree
it.
that I don't like that. Maybe there's an issue with that tone. I like that Red Ajah being a bad guy, and I think it kind of reads in that scene that way that Moraine doesn't feel the same as them. To me, like
Somewhat sure.
throughout the rest of the episode, and even just comparing like her monologue to then how that girl is like her tone, her performance that she gives. I'm like, yeah, she's like gone too far with this her own ideology, and like and
I
it's
mean, there's
cool,
just
it gives
so
me
many
another
other.
antagonist. I want another antagonist.
I'm with you about wanting an antagonist. The thing to me is that the show ends up feeling like it's making so many changes just to do it. I almost feel like it's a little kid poking me, like every time, like, I made this change. I made this change. Are you annoyed yet? Are you annoyed yet? Are you annoyed yet?
Hmm.
Without an actual reason behind it. There's
I
so
think
many
that
other
one had a
things
reason.
that, well, again, sure, but there's so many other
Okay.
ways she could have said that would have accomplished the same goal of showing that she's against men. without actually changing the history and lore
But I
of the
don't think
world.
it changes the history. Why are you taking what she said as gospel? I don't understand.
I'm not saying it necessarily is, but that isn't even how it works. Like there's two different halves to it. Even if it wouldn't be making the power dirty, it's not even making the side she touches dirty. It doesn't like make sense for the world history. She could have said something disparaging about men or about men channelers or anything like that. But again, they're just stripping the nuance away from the world building and how things work
I don't think this
with how to
girl
read them.
is going to be presenting it in the nuance. I mean, we'll see as it will go on. I mean, we're committed to watching this. That if this is the actual mechanics that like they're going with it, like men are actively tainting it instead of the dark one tainting it. I don't think so, though. I don't think they're gonna
We'll
go that
see.
route. I think this is like this character's kind of twisted
Sure.
take on it.
It could very well be, but the fact that they have yet to ever say the differences between the two, uh, even when Moraine is training Egwene, she just talks about the one power and touching the one power.
Yeah.
I know that we saw that there's going to be a title difference, but I don't even see the titles on these shows. I mean, I guess like when you're initially picking it, maybe, but the fact that it hasn't been mentioned yet does make it seem like it's feasible. Maybe that is how it works. Like, again, I hope you're right. I think what they're going for is what you're saying. They're just showing an extreme view from one faction.
Right.
Fine. But again, I don't know why in the very beginning of the show they would show something that directly is different from the lore just to piss fans off. Like
They're
I
not,
don't I
but
don't
it's not
understand that
just to piss
choice.
fans off. It's not. Th-
Well, no, but again, like I'm saying, they could have accomplished that exact same story beat without it. So anyway, I don't think we're going to
I
agree on this one, but I'm just saying this is just par for the course for this new show. There's just lots of these changes. They're trying to attempt something like, for example, Perrin having a wife, right?
don't. Okay.
Perrin has a wife for some reason.
Right.
Now, you would think that they are doing this change to for a couple reasons, right? Again, this feels very much like they're saying Perrin in the books is big guy, scared of his own strength, that type of idea. So instead of just having him be a mindful human being, it feels like they think, oh, well, we've got to make it to where he's got a wife. And then not only does she just die, okay, spoilers obviously, but again, I think we're going to get full on spoilers at this
Mm,
point. Like, not only does she die, he kills her,
mm.
right? So now we have a very in your face reason why he will be, wary of hurting people in the future.
Yeah.
Right,
I
which
like it.
is it's so terrible.
It's so
It's
terrible.
so
What's
absolutely
terrible about it?
terrible.
Because it's
Because
different.
it's again a completely unnecessary change. Like we don't need a
So
better
your thesis
reason
is,
for
hold on.
why
I think
he's
I'm
killed.
understanding more. Your thesis is you can't just change something because you want to or you want to explore the story this way. If it's if it isn't super necessary, then it should not be touched.
So
If it's not like an absolutely necessary change, you should stick because like that's kind of a new
oh,
idea to me.
what do you
That
mean the
I
rule of
don't think I
adaptation?
would go in thinking like everything has to stay the same unless it's 100% justified why you're changing it.
Well, if it's making the narrative worse and cheesy, I mean, one, I'd say, but I think what
Well,
you're
I
asking is
mean,
a larger
that's
adaptation question.
yeah. I mean,
Like,
I don't know how we're gonna measure
what's the rule of
cheesiness. I
adaptation?
will say, like, the only part that my wife even reacted to was that part, right? And I have different issues with that. I don't have issues with actually trying to give each of these characters something, as opposed to the book where they're super blank. Like, except for
So,
Matt is a prankster. Also, I'm on record or on podcast saying I don't know what the difference is between Perrin and Rand in the books. Like, there were parts of that book where I'm like, I could be reading about Rand right now, I could be reading about Perrin right now, because they just felt like blank wet logs. And here, they're making a real effort to do something with each character, to give them some sort of complication that the audience can cling on to.
So, so to back up, to answer your larger question about adaptations, right? So, like, what's the rule with adaptations, right? So, I think, of course, we could say that there aren't necessarily any rules, right? You can
Yes,
do anything you want with an
correct.
adaptation, right? But the reason why adaptations are generally made, especially these days, is because people believe they will make money. The reason people think they will make money is because they've got a big enough fan base that really likes it. And so, and they make an adaptation because they want to make money and it'll be successful and it's already got the backing of everyone who enjoys it. Now, obviously, for this, they're trying to go even bigger than that, not just the fans of the book, even though there are a lot of them, but also to bring in new people as well. So I've been thinking about this a lot actually with adaptations and like what works, what doesn't. And I was thinking more about Shakespeare recently, since I come from a theater background. And when I was in college, yeah, I mean, I remember I was in a Midsummer Night's Dream that did gender bending and stuff like that, which was cool. But if we go back, the reason why there's so many different variations now is because the originals already exist. Now, the argument could of course be made, well, the original books already exist, right? But when people are going in to see
It's
like
not
the
even an argument.
first,
You might say it's a fact.
right, it's fact. Well, the argument would be if those count as the first, if you will,
Yeah.
because my would say when you're making the first adaptation of something, the people who are fans of it, I think largely are expecting to get to see the same things that they loved, the reason why they became fans of the show in the first place. So when you do things that are different than that, it's a risk. And I think that is also a fact that if you do an adaptation that makes changes, you're rolling the dice. And you're rolling the dice in
If
this
you
hope
don't make
of,
changes, I think you are rolling the dice. If you don't make
well,
changes, I think you're rolling it harder than you are because it's a different medium. It's a totally different length, medium, everything. If you don't make changes, I'm more
You
scared
have to
about
make
that.
you have to make cuts. Obviously, you have to make cuts. But let's define changes. So obviously, yes, the length of it has to change due to the nature of it. You're able to do things in a different medium, of course, agreed. But now what I'm talking about is like story changes, character changes, like those sorts of things.
Yeah, and let me say, like,
That if
don't
you're
to
open,
minimize besides cuts, you're also going from like prose to dialogue based to script based, like the ways that you can, not really be in Rand's head like you can in a close third person is just, it's a massive change. It's a massive change.
it's a decent change,
I
but
think it's,
there's
I think it's quite
There's
enormous.
plenty, I mean, there's plenty of adaptations that are very similar to their source material. Now we can say, do they pull that off good or bad or not? Sure. But that's going to be, well, again, we can rate them how we want, but I'm saying I think that is usually what a fan is going to expect. That they're going to see the same things, but they're going to now see it, right? Because it's visual. And they're going to hit the major story beats, right? Something like Harry Potter certainly does this. You go and you see the major beats. Watchmen certainly does this. You go and you see the major story beats, right? And there's not a lot of extra stuff that's added. It's more things are taken away, for instance. Um, so my point is just that since they're fans, if you make changes, fans are going to have a reaction to that because it's going to be different, right? So to your question of like, are you not allowed to make changes or do I think that changes shouldn't happen? Largely, I would put myself in the camp of, yeah, there's a reason why the source material succeeded. And if you're not following that source material, you better be a better writer than the source material for me to enjoy it, for me to like it, especially if it's the very first instance of it coming out. These days, Spider-Man, for instance, there's so many Spider-Mans. Do whatever you want with Spider-Man at this point. I don't care. I can go back and watch the original Spider-Mans. I've already gotten to see Spider-Man in its visual medium. Same with Batman. I can go back and watch Batman in the original. Do whatever you want with Batman at this
Let's pick
point.
out something that's more an adaptation. I mean, there's no Spider-Man movie that's a direct adaptation of a Spider-Man comic. There are elements that they cribbed
Right.
from different Spider-Man comics. Same with any Batman movie. There is no one Batman movie that's there's an exact comic analog to it, but like eh, and we kind of talked about this in previous videos. I think things like Watchmen, comics are what I'm most familiar with, so I'm gonna draw the
Right.
most from. But there are things
I'm
like
a fan of Watchmen.
Watchmen,
Yeah.
Scott Pilgrim,
Was
which I
300
felt
really
like should
similar?
have deviated more. And actually, I mean, I guess Watchmen was a moderate success. I think Scott Pilgrim was a disappointment at the box office compared to its
Just check.
budget. Um,
Did Scott Pilgrim follow pretty tight?
I mean, yeah, and
Right.
part of the problem with that is like having to condense,
Mhm.
such a thing, which is kind of what I'd be terrified with Wheel of Time is that like you're queuing really closely, but you're also condensing way down, and it just gives it like a
Right.
weird feel. And we probably should get into all these because I'm feeling like more and more kind of interested in our channel being about adaptations, and we've talked about that. Um,
Yeah, I do think it's a fascinating subject to
and there's
explore.
so many.
I just like the what was that?
There's so many, and we could kind of like take like your
Yeah.
thesis here and kind of weigh it against, more things, especially
Right.
in terms of novels. There are like quite a few things where I know the old trope is the book is always better, but there are like quite a few things where like sometimes the ones that I felt have been super successful adaptations for the most part that I can remember massively deviate. And I feel like the ones that hew close, I'm always like, it was fine. Yeah, you
Harry
just
Potter
showed
was a huge
me the
success.
thing again, but kind of in this
Right.
crappier version because it's a totally
Right.
different medium and you're trying to show me the same thing in a totally different medium. And it just is like a shadowy impression of itself. And it just
Right.
doesn't work for me. And so, like, I'm kind of, this is
Yeah.
interesting. I don't think we talked enough about it. I wasn't enough in your head, but I kind of come from
Mhm.
like a totally different perspective where I'm like,
Which I
I
think is
want to
great.
see a different version of this. I want to see the filmic
Right.
version, which
It,
I don't think needs to, has
yeah.
to hew unless absolutely necessary change.
Listen, I think it can be done. Look, I'll give an example. So I started reading Invincible. Okay,
Mm.
I really liked Invincible, the animated Prime show. First episode, the beginning of it felt kind of slow, and I was like, I don't know about this. But then by the end, for anyone who's seen the end of the first episode, it had me. I was like, okay. I read the beginning of Invincible, the first good chunk of the comic book Invincible, totally different,
Yeah.
completely different. And I was so happy that I read that before all this Wheel of Time because
Mm.
before this I had sort of been in the cap, and usually my experience of the book being better,
Mm.
or even something like Jurassic Park, for instance. I love the Jurassic Park movie. I think the Jurassic Park movie is very, very well done. Holds up even going back to rewatch it. Special effects in that look better than a lot of special effects we get these days. And
Better
to
than a couple
me, if the
Trollocs, I will say in this.
right, right. To me, the movie,
Yeah.
does it great.
Yeah.
And then you get to go read the book and you get to experience even more, right? Like, you read the book and you're like, oh, I get all this additional details.
Mm.
And to me, that's always been the way that it's better, in my opinion, is like, watch the thing first, then read the source material. Because usually, in my experience, if you read the source material first and then watch it, you're disappointed.
Mm.
Because it's not doing as much or it doesn't
Mm.
hit the beats you wanted, those
Mm.
sorts of things. But Invincible sort of kind of blew me away in the other direction in that I was like, wow, I think they really made the right choices to get you invested in the characters, to get you invested in the mystery right away. And they made much more powerful storytelling decisions. So I do certainly agree that a writer can come in and be like, no, I've got the chops to tell this story in a different way and you're going to love it. And yeah, I wish that was the case for Wheel of Time. I wish that they were doing it in such a way. Like I said, I've seen glimpses of it, I thought the Nynaeve decision was cool. Like I love it when Nynaeve actually goes to kill Lan, and Lan's like, "You actually just tried to kill me." Like I loved it. I thought that was great. That was like a bright, shining moment of this is completely different than what had happened, but her skills as a healer really came into play. I love Lamb, like watching her, like that is a change. That is a storytelling decision. Someone went out on a limb on was like, let's have Moraine be hurt. Let's have Nynaeve find him later and actually be useful. Let's do this. I think it'll be awesome. And it was. I was all for it. So I'm not against your thesis of let's make changes. I just think that's harder. I think it's someone has to be a better storyteller to make a change and make it successful because you're going against what I think a lot of people want because they want to see what they love. I think it's easier to do something that's just the same. And I think a lot of people try to do something that's different for the reasons you say, and then they just mess it
Yeah.
up, and then it's just crap.
Well, what's interesting
So
about you're saying it's a very like fan centric, viewpoint, like putting the fans front and center as the audience that we're trying to serve here. I'm not 100% sure that's true in even the majority of these circumstances. I know what you said at the beginning is like, oh, we're adapting everything. Everything seems to have like a source IP. But I don't think any Hollywood execs are going, I'm going to be happy with an audience size that is the fans of this book. I think like if you told an executive fans of your book are going to be 75% of your audience, they would be like, "No, we're not greenlighting this. It's not going forward."
maybe, I mean, I don't know. I think they're obviously pulling adaptations because it's a known work, as opposed to going with something that's random, because they think I can get the fans and I can get people beyond that
Right. I
too. So
think
I've at
they're
least got a
thinking
base,
I
right?
think they're thinking I can
Right.
get this base 20% of
Sure. Whatever
audience.
the base
But
percentage is.
that's minority of your audience that you're going for. So I don't think the thesis of like I make it exactly like this that's going to bring this like that's the goal, then like yeah, maybe we would just hew exactly beat by beat everything that happens. But I don't think anybody's looking at it thinking like that's gonna be good enough.
This video is going to be forever because we haven't even gotten into the
I
details,
know.
but I
Well,
think it's
maybe
important
we'll
for us to talk
split up
about.
and do like separate, like really breaking down bit by bit episodes, and maybe this episode will be more just
Yeah,
kind of about adaptation overall, these ideas, so
I,
that people have an
I
idea of
want
what
to
we
because
mean.
I just said because I want to keep talking about
Yeah.
adaptations because I think a lot of us I think people just come in with reactions to the show,
Yeah.
right? And I very much like this place of let's just talk about adaptations.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about what are the rules of adaptations, and then we've got a framework to evaluate the show on. We've got some common language we
Yeah.
can all be using to get a sense about adaptations, and you can figure out, you as a viewer where you fall in this spectrum of what you want. What I'm saying is that to me, it's the reason I say risk is because I agree with you. Obviously, the goal is to have the fans and then have more. But the reason I say risk is because if you appease the fans, like if you just do the things that happen in the show or like that happen in the book in the show, then you're making them happy. And then you're potentially grabbing other people that just don't read books, that, just want to watch something visual. I don't think a change needs to happen in order to necessarily draw more in.
Yeah.
Now, obviously they thought differently. I mean, 17 minutes in, they're already having sex, when that never happens at all. So, I mean, there's clear choices they're making to try to create a larger appeal.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, again, mistakes can be made because, you know, do you need that? They think they do to get more people in, but like Lord of the
I
Rings
mean,
didn't have that.
yeah,
And fine.
this is maybe getting into how good a book do you think Eye of the World is?
No, it's
Because
an
I
excellent point.
think
So,
Lord of the Rings is
yeah,
probably just a much better book. And then like you
right,
you
right.
stick close to Lord of the Rings, you're probably okay because it's just
Mhm, mhm.
inherently better. I feel like Eye of the World is real rough, man. And I know like people will like come at me in the comments for that. But look, watch our video of the last chapter.
Yeah, yeah,
Watch
watch
any
our
of
video
our
of the
other
last one.
videos to get kind of my
We're
take
talking
on
about
it.
it.
But I think you
Right.
just do it straight, and it fails even harder potentially than this show will fail.
And will the show fail? So I am on record in our last one, well, the last one about the book, agreeing that there are some big weaknesses to this first book. I know plenty of people bounce off this first book completely. Like they hear about Wheel of Time, they're like, let me go read Wheel of Time, and then they just ricochet.
If you
Like,
told me I'm a
um,
non-fantasy, and keep in mind, everybody, I'm a non-fantasy reader, but if you told me, Steve, the show super faithful, does everything beat by beat from the first couple chapters of the book, I'd be like, hard no. Hard no. I'm not watching that.
right, right. So yeah. It's tricky because I do agree with you about, but we talked, for example, Game of Thrones, right? Game of Thrones, and I agree with what you said previously, that it was written in a very easy to film almost way. I mean, obviously, I say easy to film loosely, and that obviously the sets, the costumes, like the locations, like, oh, not easy. But in terms of the way it follows a character and then jumps to someone else and the immediate stakes, the immediate action right off the bat, like that is a just tight book. It's a great book.
Mm.
It's a great book one. I said the same about Harry Potter recently. Like rereading it, it's got some meandering in it, sure, but overall it's pretty tight as well. So to have a faithful adaptation from a source material that's really strong and can more easily be transformed, sure, right? This one it is squishy, and by that I mean like I do understand your concerns, and I did think that this was an opportunity for not your concerns, but universal concerns people had had about certain aspects of the story, like too much braid tugging, or like too long on journeys, too long describing things, stuff like that. This is an opportunity for them to tighten it up, to cut some of that extra walking, extra descriptions of past places, and just show us something visually. So sure, I'm with you there. I guess the point is, at what stage does that stop? And I think you brought up something really interesting, and I think this could maybe be a way we get into the more specific details if we want to go. Just, I think we should still talk about this now, and then you can divide it as you want. But for example, you talked about how Perrin to you and Rand were very similar, right, as characters. Like Matt obviously stood out as trickster guy, whatever, prankster guy. But though they were two, similar. But in this, Perrin now has this bloody insta backstory, right? So for you, that was a plus. That was a good choice from the showrunners. Yeah.
I mean, I like that it's something. At least it's
Okay.
something. I like
Mm.
it more when conflict is between characters. I kind of don't like, and this might be something I actually watched some of your show Arcane, and I mean we should make like maybe a whole other video of us fighting about that particular show. But like I don't like these character things where like, oh, there's just some trauma. Like it's all internal. Like it's like, oh, I have this trauma and I feel bad about it, and that's my character. Because it's not between characters. Like, what I like about the Rand and Egg thing is they both made choices, they have competing desires within themselves, and that's putting them at loggerheads, and you're putting them in a situation where they have to deal with each other. Perrin, what we've set up is just like this, oh, this tragic thing, which maybe will inform how he acts, but it's not a conflict because it's not a conflict between characters, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not
I
super happy with it. Would I be super happy with the nothing that we got in the book? I would be maybe less happy with the nothing that we got in the book. At least this is something that defines the character somewhat.
No, I'm glad we're talking about this. I hear what you're saying. It does create a clear distinction. I'm certainly with you that conflicts between characters are, generally speaking, more interesting.
Mm.
You could have a tragic backstory that then creates conflict between two living
Sure.
characters.
Yeah.
Sure, awesome. But yeah, and right now, and this is where we are going to get a little bit of acting and choices here. Um, if they were going to do this, right, there's just so many other things I feel like they could have done to make it more effective. The interactions between Perrin and his wife were odd. It was like
The
there was
first one was
something his
real odd. I thought
yeah, it's like
like
there was something his wife was mad about. Like
yeah.
they were having a fight or
Yeah.
something, or she didn't like Egwene because she didn't go to the ceremony. Um, it was
Yeah, I
something
didn't get that at
strange.
all.
There was just some sort of oddity
Right,
between
right.
them, right? And then the fact that that's never explored, that we don't learn what the cause of that was,
I agree.
were just odds. And it also created a disassociation between them. They didn't feel as close because of that.
Right.
So then when we lose her, right, there's not as much of a hit as there could have been because the interactions we've gotten between these two characters have been strange. Um, and it's not like we got, I mean, she does save him, but there's no looks between them of like whatever our past argument was about. Now we're on the
Mhm.
same team because we're
Right, right, right.
surviving. Like there weren't shots or directing that increased their relationship before you severed the cord of their
Mm.
relationship. So that was very strange to me. Like if you're going to, and that's what I was trying to say about like they make a choice, but then they don't like follow through with that change. Like so we make a change, but then we don't use it to the extent that it could be used.
Right.
And then go
I
ahead.
think where we're different is that then you're like, so don't change it at all. Like
Yeah,
if you're
mess
gonna
it up.
bobble it, which I agree with all of your complaints about there. I didn't understand what was going on with those two. I thought they were mad at each other, but I didn't know why. But I wasn't even 100% sure they were mad at each other. And you know me in clarity, bro. You know me in clarity. I want to know what the deal is. That's part of my issue with Eye of the World, is that so often I don't know like what the emotional deal was. So I am 100% with you with that. But I think it would be just as bad to leave it the way it was in the book. Like, I don't look at it and go, oh, problem solved, don't make a change. I don't think that's true.
Well, just to yeah, okay. So I mean, I'm gonna say one other thing about
Mm.
the way they handled it,
Yeah.
and then that. So I get your point, which is would nothing be better,
Hmm.
right? To me, nothing isn't necessarily nothing because you replace it with something about somebody else. Like I don't feel like you necessarily need to care a lot about Perrin yet.
No.
That we can care more about him later, potentially, right? I'm just saying
Right.
as an alternate, like we could do more shots as we were talking about before of other locales and stuff like that that are taking place as opposed to this strange new relationship. But the other thing is they don't seem to deal with the effects of those choices. I almost every scene where they were all hanging out together, I was almost screaming at the TV, in some cases screaming at the TV, like somebody ask Perrin how he is doing about his dead wife.
Mm.
Because they're supposed to be friends. And Matt asks Rand about like, oh, I can sense something happen about you and Egwene, which I liked. It shows like, they know each other well enough for that. But then we get like
I
nothing
felt,
about like Perrin's wife. It's not until Shadow
yeah.
Logoth with Matt and
Hmm.
them, which was a beautiful scene.
Yeah.
I really like that scene. Matt to me can actually act. I'm super sad that we're losing him. He's like easily to me the best actor of the
Hmm.
boys. Like I
Interesting.
actually enjoy him. He's got nuance to his performance. I believe he can pull off going sort of, not crazy, but like sort of, with his dark insanity, if you will. I really enjoy him as an actor. His again, the character choices, we'll get into that in a moment. But I thought that scene between him and Perrin was very
Mm.
powerful. I loved it. I loved it. But I don't know why it didn't happen before. It just makes them seem like terrible friends. If we were watching almost any other show in your book with like, oh, did your wife just die?
Mm.
We would talk about how you're doing with your now dead wife. But there's just nothing. There's nothing there. So to me, the fact that they do such a terrible job with this like new choice does undermine the rest of the story because then I'm thinking about how they're messing that up as opposed to enjoying the story. So to me, nothing would be better than making it bad in this particular
Hmm.
case
Yeah, I'm not
because
sure.
it
I
is so
I appreciate trying to do something with the three leads, more so than the book does. And I would if I were the executive, I would say, look, you gotta do something with these three leads. Don't mess it up, but you gotta do something
I'm not
with those
against
three
the
leads, you know?
attempt. I'm not against the attempt to do something, but it seems so obvious to have a scene of, anybody just being like, "How you doing, man?"
Well, I mean,
Like,
yeah, we
just
do get
anything.
it. It's not until Shadar Logoth. That's episode 3. They are on the run for
I
their
mean,
lives again for the whole
I
thing,
mean, they are, but Egwene and Rand seem to have all the time to talk and find
right?
each other no matter where he happens to walk to. So it
Well, we
doesn't
see
seem
who
like
we
a
care
problem
more
that
about,
way.
obviously. And again, well, yeah, I do care more about those two,
I
to be
mean, if
perfectly
Rand
honest.
wasn't a wooden board of an actor, perhaps yes, I would
Yeah,
care about those scenes in the slightest.
eh,
Egwene, I feel, does a pretty good job. So yeah,
I like so like that. I get that criticism. I didn't feel it super huge, because I'm also assuming that I'm not seeing, all the interaction that's happening between everybody. Obviously, there's like time passing,
sure.
here at this point, and we do get that nice scene. I felt like Baron was crying a lot. I don't know. I felt like there were other times where this was addressed because I feel like the dude just has the single teardrop thing happening like like
Don't
every
know
other
if
time
Farron
he's
can
on
act
screen.
because they haven't given him enough to say. Like I have no idea if Farron can act at all. Um,
He's got the eye
yeah.
drop one teardrop thing going just, totally fine.
Okay.
Um yeah.
So,
Okay.
so just I think those are examples for adaptation versus not. And the similarity with Matt. So like Matt's backstory of having like parents that are crappy and these like two young sisters he's got to watch. They do address in that same later scene about our parents will check in on your sisters and stuff because they're giving him this sort of like tragic backstory, Matt. But then he'd be less likely to leave due to worrying about uh, his sisters, and then with like Tam instantly being awake, like them all leaving was just beyond ridiculous to me. Like there's no conversation, there's no the town council or women's circle or anybody saying anything about them leaving. They're all just like, "Yep, guess we're all gonna go right now," and that's yeah, like
Well, I mean, the armies,
I don't
you
know.
see
That
the
first
army.
episode was just
Like, the army's like right there. So, I mean, like, I don't
I
know
know,
how
but
much
there's
time they
none
have to
of
like take
them
a vote.
convincing the. Yeah, there's none of them like convincing the like the parents of anything. Like the dad is concerned about Egwene's thing into the women's circle, but then just leaving town forever, being trucked by Trollocs, whatevs. Like there's just there's nothing there. It's just so
Well,
rushed
I will say
through.
this.
Uh,
I agree with that, and I think mainly that comes from that battle scene went on 800 years. Like it did
Crazy long.
not need to be that long. There was like no, and I was even like I didn't even think it really like looked that great. So like that's the other
Yeah,
thing that like I was thinking
let's talk
back on
about it.
Game of Thrones, and I think like sometimes this I'm interested to hear your thoughts on because I know like one of your big complaints about the Game of Thrones show is that there's not enough
Yes,
magicy
dude.
magic, there's not enough wolvy wolves, there's not enough all this. But that
Will
first
be
episode
wolves.
looks impeccable from what I remember of
Oh, I
Game of
agree.
Thrones. It's beautiful, it looks
Game of Thrones is
gorgeous
so
from
beautiful.
first shot to last shot. And I think it's because of the restraint. I think it's because of, whoever's directing those episodes goes like, look, this is what I can pull off and this is what I can't. And like I can see like one specific shot, and maybe I'll put it here if I get ambitious with my editing skills, y'all. I'm learning, so gotta bear with me.
Everybody, okay.
But there's one specific shot where like the Trot grabs Nynaeve. And you can see like how like when you're shooting it, I think this is the problem with CGI a lot. And I've been seeing like a lot of kind of like backlash to the backlash about CGI where like people are like, it's just effects and it's just Hollywood has always been using effects and it's just a tool and this and that. But I think where the problem specifically comes in is where like you think you can pull off this shot, but there's no way to know because it's all going to be done post this shot.
Yeah,
So you have
yeah,
to film it
sure.
kind of with a bit of faith. Like you have to go like, okay, we're going to film this. We're stuck with the actual filmic part of this once we do it, and then we're hoping that the CGI comes through on it and makes it look good and back. And like that one specifically, I was like, nah, that looked janky. It just looked janky. And like the other thing you were saying, oh, I enjoy seeing the Trollocs run on all fours. I would have cut it, man, because the actual suits
Same
look
line.
so good, the guys on stilts so
Yeah,
good, and whenever that happened, now they're running really fast or they're running on all fours through the water, and then I'm like, that just doesn't look as good. And I'm okay with
some
things
of the
not looking
earlier dark shots.
perfect, but like I was like, what is this really super adding? I think like you just have some restraint and you say, look, our Trollocs and suits are not going to run that fast, and that's okay. But it'll look
Some of the
magnificent.
pullback shots in the dark forest when we were like sort of seeing them come and you saw like one like loping. I thought that was cool. But yeah, when it's in the light of day on the
Yeah,
water, when he's up against the riverbank, I mean, it didn't look terrible. But I think most could agree. I mean, there are probably lots of things they're saying that people won't agree with, but I think most can agree this show does not look as good as Wheel of Time.
yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, the show does not look as good as Game of
Game of
Thrones.
Thrones, yeah.
Um, if I hadn't read that GQ article about how much they spent, I would think the budget of this show is way lower
Mm-hmm.
than Game of Thrones. I would think they've got a fraction of the budget. And I agree. I agree that while I missed seeing those things in Game of Thrones for sure, like, barely any direwolf action, for instance,
Right.
this, I think maybe they tried to bite off more than they could chew. And yeah, and it just kept going. Like I thought Moraine calling down the lightning was it. And then they ended up doing this whole weird, like, rip out the end shot. I feel they just wanted that shot. They wanted the shot so bad of her collapsing at the same time as the end and the smoke and land coming over.
Yeah.
And it's just, did you have the money for that? Because it feels like just other things don't look good. Like
Mm-hmm.
Rand's coat, like whenever time I see him in that coat, I'm like, what is this weird thing he's wearing? Like it's just, I mean,
I
the
thought
white
his
cloaks are
sweater was even more
about,
Abercrombie than the coat, to be honest. Like
oh
every
my
time
God,
I saw him in
his
that
sweater was
sweater,
just
I'm
when we were
like,
first sitting there, like,
dude,
what
was
is
that
this
30%
immersion
off
supposed to
at the
be?
Gap? What is this?
That sweater was crazy. Like I was just watching an Abercrombie and Fitch chat. Like what was that? So yeah, like I don't what did they spend their money on? Was it just all the Trollocs?
Well, there's
Um,
too much in that battle. I think that you're right,
it's
and
too
it's the
much.
ambition. And this is, I think, another interesting thing to think about in a show where you're gonna want lots of magic. I know you would be disappointed if there wasn't lots of magic. How do
Yeah,
you how do you draw that line of going, we can pull this off or we can't pull this off? That
you
battle
save
for
that entire
me,
budget.
leave the one at Rand's place, have
Yes,
that. Have a
that's what you
little
need.
bit in town and have Moraine do something big and like
Yeah,
blow their lights out. And then I think I also like that they're coming, the rest of them are coming down the mountain. We got to get the hell out of here now because it like kind of cleans up a lot of stuff that I think is jinky
it
at
makes
that
it
part in the
faster.
book. But that
Yeah.
that battle just went on and on and on, man.
I just feel like they blew their budget. I feel like they just completely blew their budget on that scene, and the visuals of other parts suffered.
Yeah.
I'm guessing because of it. The show just looks cheap. It doesn't look cheap. It looks cheap in comparison to Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
It's not on that visual standard.
And I think that was a
Um,
big part of Game of Thrones, like
yeah.
what got people coming back was how gorgeous that first episode looked. I just remember like the tree, whatever, I forget the lore and whatever, but the tree that's in the Northerners' place and just like
Look, you've
that
been there.
like set
Yeah.
and like how it all looked and I was like this thing just looks ridiculously gorgeous.
You talked to me before about like Jeff, don't you think maybe instead of, spending a lot of time in an area, they could show you that visually, right?
Right.
And I think maybe part of the reason that is because yeah, Game of Thrones does that.
Yeah.
They don't need to tell you about like the history of Winterfell or that it's like
Right.
cold there. You
Yeah.
see it, you
Yeah.
feel it. Like the cloaks that they're all wearing, like when you go up to the wall and they're, again, the way they're dressed, like you
Mm,
feel the environments of where you are at.
yeah.
That didn't that's not happening with this. That's what I said. This just feels like generic towny town fantasy lands.
Mm,
They do lanterns. Okay, is that supposed to make me excited? Is it really like that's not? They don't do that. So what do I care? And that just feels like the generic fantasy thing they do. It worked in Tangled, so like let's just have lanterns everywhere now these days in shows, which are cool. The first time, but you got so many other pages of stuff you could pull from, and this is what you choose is just something new. Um, and I think that's the frustration is just with the constant newness. Like if you say something like, Jeff, I didn't feel connected to the characters. They didn't feel different enough. And I'm like, I feel that. I hear that. Like let's do something to make them a little distinct from each other. Fine. But like just the constant replacements, the constant additions, it's like they just don't have trust in the source material almost at all. And so that's just sort of wild to see. But and that was just about again relating to the visuals there and what they chose to do. I did like Tam's speech. Tam's speech about the turning the wheel was cool,
mm, mm,
and about like we tried to do it, a time better, and we live our lives, and that
yeah.
was neat. And I like them being up on the mountain and being separate. But yeah, I don't know why they decided for that battle to go on as crazy long as it did. Um, yeah, the other thing I did just want to talk about with the battle is with that battle, again, my argument would be you don't need to spend any of the money on that. Don't even have it. Um, I know they want to follow Moraine, and that's fine. So I guess maybe that's an impossibility. But they so lose. They completely didn't do any of Rand having to carry his father and how
Mm,
hard that is. Of Rand learning anything about his own backstory. I was watching with my wife, and she made an amazing point that there's such cool shots, like Walking Dead style, that could have been made of, Rand dragging his father in the forest and that fade coming along. Like there could have been some more almost like horror aspects to
mm,
it, felt that tension. And then the whole idea is that, he gets there to salvation and it's destroyed,
mm,
and we lose that hit completely.
mm,
And there's just this massive budget spend on, all these Trollocs and everything. And don't get me wrong, overall, I did think that Trollocs looked good.
mm.
I would have liked a couple more different types. They sort of all kind of ended up looking similar to a degree. There wasn't a lot of like wolf faces, or I mean, they did have one pig face there, but there wasn't. I know we've seen a shot of a beak at some point, and those are hard. But like, with the amount of money that they're putting in the show, I just do wonder where is it going? Like,
Oh, it
where
went in
is all this?
that battle
That,
was not
that one
cheap,
battle,
but
yeah,
that's what I mean by kind of going like I
got
can
a little
see
bit
on
looks cool.
paper they're like, "Oh, we're going to blow this out. It's going to look
They're such a
amazing. It's going to look incredible. It's going to be this big hook that brings everybody in."
right.
But I feel like it's such a I don't
Yeah,
know what the skill is for being able to go like, okay, here's our budget. Here's how much the
it's
animation is going to cost. Here's what we got to shoot months beforehand to then have it finished later on with that. I think you got to be like a Spielbergian level genius to like actually pull that off to a way that's like
yeah,
super
it's
duper
movie cost
satisfying,
comparison.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas they think going
Hmm.
something, it probably would have been better, like going something smaller, just having a battle at the farm, having like kind of a cool little cat and mouse in the woods with like you know, I can almost, it feels a little cliche, but I can kind of see it like, oh, you're down, you're scared, the hoofs are like walking by.
You
It's a
see the
close
big, you
shot of
know,
like the hooves and then they double back or something.
yeah,
You know, that
yeah.
to me, the fact that I see it so clearly in my mind makes me think it's already cliche and that maybe they shouldn't have done it.
Maybe.
But
I mean, I think it could be shot well. I don't
but
know if they have the
exactly,
skill to do it
like
well.
you, I think on the day would have more control. You'll know when you have the shot. Like you'll know it.
Right.
Like you'll see it and you'll
It's
be
not a
like, this
crazy
is a great
budget.
shot, or like this is
Yeah.
versus like, oh, we have to plan all this out. We kind of shoot it sort of knowing what it's going to look like, but a lot of that's kind of hope and then hoping that the budget carries through on the back end of it. I just think that's exponentially probably harder to do. I understand why they did it because somebody's thinking like, oh, a little tense cat and mouse thing isn't going to quite be big enough to convey the magic of this world, but like,
What did we think? Talk to me about the magic. How do you think about the visuals of the magic?
I mean, yeah, I think it's fine, the little swirly swirly. I don't know if you hate that, but it doesn't really it, it doesn't do anything to me one way or the other.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that was basically it. It was just kind of like, okay. I mean, it wasn't, like, I mean, there were some cool moments where the fireball shot out and
Hmm.
stuff like that. It seemed like, the whip of air was kind of neat. But yeah, it just felt like they didn't quite have the budget to pull it off and make it look amazing. I think some people will disagree. I think some people will really like the magic. For me, it didn't add or subtract a great
Hmm.
deal
Yeah.
personally. I mean, it wasn't like so awesome that I was like, oh, I don't care if you like this show or not. You need to watch that scene because it was that visual. Like with The Witcher, like The Witcher has an early fight that I'm like, I don't care if you like fantasy or not. Like this fight scene is just impeccably done. Like the
Hmm.
choreography is great.
Hmm.
So like I wouldn't be telling anybody that for this. The
And
magic
is
is
that
just kind
done
of like
more with choreography in camera or
it was just choreography.
effects?
It was just straight choreography.
Right.
It's just a fight scene between him and
Hmm.
some bandit guys.
Yeah.
That happens early on. But yeah, I mean that is the advantage of what you can do with actual people. But again, tricky because they are supposed to fight the Trollocs. Um, I feel like again, it's 3 episodes. There's so much that we could talk about, so many details. But I know we've also been going for a while, so I
Yeah,
do
is there
feel
anything else about episode one that you want to get off your chest and then maybe let's make a cut and let's come back and talk about two and three?
that's a good point. No, that'll help things out. And thanks everyone for bearing with us as we're figuring out our format. And feel free to tell us what you like us digging into or talking more about. I'm so glad we really did dive into adaptations and what that means and preference associated with that. And I think yeah, you're completely right about episode one. Any last thoughts about episode one? I will say I was pleasantly surprised. I thought that as soon as we saw I thought the Fade Trolloc attack was going to happen much sooner. I thought we weren't even going to get Pat
Mm,
and Fane
mm,
rolling into town because there was that pullback shot from the inn and you see a horse come up after like
right,
Moraine and them
right,
are
right.
already
You
there.
thought it was like right then.
And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I was like, this is it. It's gonna happen now, right? And I was like, trash. This will be trash that it's already happening. Of course it is. They can't let me have any time in the town at all. But then Pat and Fane rolled up, and I really enjoyed Pat and Fane. I mean, I don't know how I feel about Matt's like dark, like living situation, and that he's
Yeah.
a thief and steals from people and all this. I'm like, yeah, okay. Um, but I really enjoyed Pat and Fane and his interaction.
That was
I
maybe
like
my
that.
maybe that is the only part of the battle I like where it just like cuts to him and he's like later.
Who are they?
Yeah, I know that part was cool. Like I'm down for that too. Like I mean, maybe a little too obvious
Right.
about stuff, but
But I liked it. I liked
I
it.
know.
Okay,
But
I'm like, okay, this guy's shady and like this guy. Again, it made me like a
yeah,
character that I straight up hate in the book. Like
no. So
straight up hate him. And now I
I
already
enjoy
like
Pat
him
and Fane.
with just subtle little things. I already like him in the show.
He's got this big old toothy grin, and it's just I
Yeah.
like Pat and Fane. Like
Yeah.
I will happily on record say, give me more scenes of that guy. Loved it. I mean, honestly, I feel like they knew. I'm going to say this about Matt. I don't know which way it swings. It's like I felt like they knew Matt was the better actor, so they give him all these scenes. But then he's so much better than the other two actors. Are like, we can't keep him. We got to get rid of him. So like, we can't. He's making the other actors look bad. So we gotta punt him for season 2. But like, it's so fascinating. If you think we get so many more scenes, like with him doing stuff, especially later. But especially that scene with him and Pat and Fane. I love Pat and Fane being like, "Can I sell this in town?" And stuff like just that little stuff. So that to me is again an example of a change. I felt like they took to its logical next step and made it fun. And that's all I'm asking is just like, if you're going to make a change, go with it. Like have that change persist and affect the characters and how they interact with each other. And so that's one that I feel like they are doing a through line with. And then we see, of course, come up again in later episodes as well. So the Matt Thief thing, do I love it? Not really. It feels like we're just going like D&D with it or something. But at least they're continuing it, and that I appreciate. That I like.
All right.
So,
Well,
so that was just a positive
yeah.
about the first episode. That made me feel a bit better. But in terms of the rest of it, yeah, episode 1, I had to stop and breathe and be like, okay. yeah. Part of me was like, I just need to rip this off like a Band-Aid. I just need to keep going, or I won't watch it. But yeah, episode 1 was rough. So I would say if there's any fans out there that watch episode 1 and are like, oh, I don't know if this show is for me. At least for me, I think it got better. I think episode 2 and episode 3 are better episodes than episode 1. I think there are some cool visuals with the Trollocs in episode 1. There's other things that are problematic, as we just talked about. But overall, I would say if you're a fantasy fan and episode 1 made you think maybe the show isn't for me, I would say give it another episode or 2 before you decide.
All right, and we are going to
That's
give
my take.
those episodes a closer look in our next episode, everybody. Please
Yes.
dislike and subscribe, and we will see you in the next
Appreciate
one.
it.